This is going to be a sensitive video topic, but sometimes the uncomfortable things are the ones that we need to address the most. And so, as people who are commenting or even breaking news on social media, it's important to remember that we can only and we should only state what is known, not what we think necessarily, or add speculation, especially to breaking news, but what is actually known. So here's where I'm going to start. So we know that the man who drove his truck into a Michigan synagogue, his name was Ayman Mohammed Ghazali, and that he was a U.S. citizen who immigrated from Lebanon more than 15 years ago. And we know that he worked at Hamido, which is a shawarma place in Dearborn Heights. We know that when his neighbors were spoken to by other members of the media, that they were shocked, they cried. One said it's because they killed his brother, right? The other one called him his rock. All of his neighbors knew him and loved him, and they all knew about what had happened to his family, and one of them said they were planning on bringing him flowers. His family was killed in an Israeli attack in Lebanon. If you don't know much about Lebanon, it is a parliamentary democratic republic, a lot like Israel. No, Israel is not the only democracy in the Middle East, never has been. Hezbollah is a political party, an elected political party that holds 12% of parliamentary seats in Lebanon. They separately have a militant wing, which is more controversial, although only 19 countries out of the 180 or so that we have that are recognized by the UN actually call them terrorists, and most of those countries are in the West. The party was founded in 1982 following the then Israeli invasion and mass slaughter of Lebanon, which in 4 short months killed 15,000 people there. I think the total number of Israeli people killed were 654 total out of that number. That includes the slaughter of 3,500 innocent civilians at a refugee camp that were killed by a Christian militant group that was funded and supported by the IDF. We know that based on current reporting that some people are alleging, although there's been no definitive proof, that 2 of the family members that were killed of Ayman were associated with Hezbollah, although that seems to be completely speculative, and Hezbollah, again, is an elected political party in Lebanon. It is a legitimate political party. And as much as MAGA, as much as we hate to say that, but that is true. And those aren't the only 2 people who were killed, although that seems to be where the media is going to run with it. They also killed his very young niece and nephew. And the night before this attack was carried out, Ayman shared their photograph of them smiling in their jerseys online. So we know that this was a motivating factor to what he did. We also know that he has no criminal record and no ties himself to any terrorist organizations, whether designated by the US or not. We know that he ran his truck into a synagogue in Michigan that fundraises and makes special trips to visit the IDF, and it's advised that people bring them gifts, and so that they can have the experience of how hard it is to be an IDF soldier. We know that they host major fundraisers for the IDF and Israeli offensive activities. We know that they also fund tours of Israel that also include going to the border with Syria and discussing the need for protection and expansion, to go to one of the towns that's on the border of Gaza, which is Palestinian land. They go into the West Bank. They go up north to near Lebanon. They basically do a colonist tour of Israel over 10 days, and this is an organization that pays for it. The news is really running with this whole, they hit a synagogue where there were children in daycare, but this facility is also humongous. It's huge, and the daycare facility is one part of it, but they're trying to intentionally make it seem like children were a target, even though they weren't, and they're trying to somehow balance this with the coverage of the United States dropping a Tomahawk missile on an Iranian girls' middle school, killing at least 168 people. Most of them were little girls, and framing this as a back and forth. Now, I'm not going to say anything is right or wrong in this case because that is all of the information that is known. But if we're using the actual fixed definitions of terrorism, this does not fit. This was not someone who has, at least as evidence currently shows, who has been motivated by religious or political means. They're not trying to inspire terrorists. They are not looking to create some kind of societal change. This was a man whose entire family was just slaughtered and murdered by a terrorist rogue state. 5,000 miles away, 3,000 miles away, and probably felt helpless and like there was nothing he can do about it, and went to a place that is not innocent and is one of the largest fundraisers for these types of tricks and organizations in Michigan, and struck him with their car. Nobody was killed. They're citing the ample security at the facility, which is, great. I don't want anybody to be killed, but you cannot keep terrorizing other countries. You cannot keep invading other countries and expect the people who are most impacted, the people who have families and loved ones who are starved, displaced, tortured, killed, to have no reaction. By all accounts, this was a warm, loving, nice, friendly man who was part of a community. And the only statement from him that we'll probably ever get is him posting that photo of those young children who were murdered by Israel. And no one seems to really want to talk about that other than the Detroit Free Press, which give them total credit. They've done most of the investigative work on the job. But this quick jump to this is terrorism, which we seem to be doing all of the time now. Anytime there's a school shooting now, if it's a brown person, they want to call it terrorism instead of just your regular old white person who represents over 90% of mass shootings in school and community type places in this country. When terrorism has a specific definition and it's motivated by racial political ideology, and it's meant to inspire other acts, it's meant to destabilize, it's meant to cause societal shift change. Things like 9/11, you categorically fit into the classification of terrorism. Things like what happened in Michigan do not. And pretending like we can just morph these words, like the word anti-Semitism in itself that has been completely corrupted and become useless, is how we end up with a story about a man who snapped because he lost his whole family and drove a truck into a building that is associated with the people who murdered his whole family into an anti-Semitist terrorism attack, which it was not. Maybe you'd have that argument if he had just open fired onto a group of Jewish people who have no association with Israel, but you can't look at the things that they were advertising, especially the details of this trip that they take, and not see how this is an apartheid colonizer tour and in large part a genocide tour, because they absolutely got down to the border with Gaza. And it's a tragedy. And I don't agree with taking out your tragedy on other people that you don't know. But that doesn't mean that we can't understand it and empathize and sympathize with it. Part of what motivates terrorism groups in other countries is injustice that has so profoundly shifted the dynamics of a community or a place that people will weaponize that to create a group of people who are motivated by injustice. And it oftentimes comes in the guise of religious or political or ideological weaponry, and it is often used to manipulate people who are hurting into fighting back, oftentimes not at the people who are actually responsible. But these are human beings that the United States and Israel have been killing with impunity for years, really since Israel's inception. And to be so naive as to think that that would never land on our doorstep is a very special and delusional sense of privilege. I mean, 9/11 in many ways was retaliation for the westward expansion into the Middle East and the control of their oil resources. And then, of course, the arming and training Al Qaeda against Russia, and then all of the geopolitical context within that. And if you haven't read Jihad versus McWorld, it's a little dated now, but it perfectly predicted everything that happened with 9/11. Then you would understand this a little better. But there's such a lack of nuance and subtlety in media coverage. And there always has been, but it's been increasing with social media, that this is not always as simple as hero versus villain. Sometimes it is bystander versus complicity, or victim versus complicity. And those discussions, if we're not having them, are only going to lead to more of this. And that is what is known. And as more information comes out, the picture may become fuller. It might be different once all the details are fleshed out. But for now, that is what is known. And that is all that is known. So let's be rational and nuanced in how we talk about these things.